So I now have the pleasure to introduce Marcel Bilow, who is a colleague of CINARK from TU Delft and head of the Bucky lab. And that is what you're going to talk about in a second. But Marcel, personally, I've had the pleasure to, oh, you were actually supposed to introduce him. But no, I'm going to do it. Yeah, now I'm going to do it. Confusion. No, I had the pleasure to meet you almost like 10 years ago. Yeah, and I think at that time you were just about defending your PhD. I had a hard time figuring that it was a PhD because it was so much hands-on. You were constructing things, designing things, experimenting, and asking thousands of questions at one time. I mean, not only in your PhD work, but I mean, when in person, when we spoke about all these things. So, yeah, so it's all worth it. And very, very inspiring. And we have been following your work also on the line with the group, Ulrich, you've been part of Ulrich's group, and our own PhDs, some of them here, former PhDs have also worked with you, and it has been very, very exciting always to hear what you have to say. So please, welcome, Odilo. Oh, no, not Odilo.
Thank you very much.
Marcel.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sorry.
It's a pleasure for me to be here, so now I have to switch the system in here. Let's see where my presentation lures. It's maybe here. Rechts oben. You're right.
This is an indicator.
Yeah, so. So, I'd like to talk about the PD Lab. It's the platform for product development from the chair of product development in cooperation with the many other people, and in honor to this very symposium and the words from Steen, we may also call it the proper detail lab. It's a story I'd like to tell. It's not about me itself, it's about a team. And within the team we have 4 important people. This is Tilman Klein, head of our facade research group. Peter Stoutjesdijk, former student, colleague of mine, researcher and entrepreneur. And Jeroen van Veen, and I will introduce these people further on within this talk. Peter, as a student, went to MIT, get in contact with Larry Sass and friction fit connections, actually using a CNC milling machine to make wood connections very precise and therefore also very sturdy. He bought then a CNC mill. This is a very old one, actually from the 70s, but made in Germany, therefore very sturdy and still capable. And then you may also say, from the old ladies, you are able to learn the most. Peter, during his studies and his graduation project, developed a Haiti house, which is entirely CNC milled. And this was a 1:10 scale model, one of many thousands, to actually give every of the victims of this huge catastrophic happening their own home. He was able to build it 2 years later in 1:1, and it's now under display at our faculty. Well, this is version 0.1. Oh no, sorry, 1.0. In the meantime, after graduating, he started his company. And he built already for friends of him and his family a very small house in her garden. And back then, he was already trying to get the most out of these CNC friction connections. He developed a system, like Lego, where each of the bricks is pre-manufactured and then brought to the building site, having in mind that each of the different elements has to be carried by 2 persons, and then you are able to go into the front door and also build at the back of your house, even in a Dutch row house. His thoughts were going so wide that he already started thinking about a building system you can online access, and by placing these different standard components and maybe a few specialized components, you're already able to confirm your house and got a price immediately, like you order a car. And whatever dream you have, this is not his design, but he's able to translate that into these building blocks using standard components and special ones. And within that, you may call it 4 or 5D planning. You already have a lot of information at your hand. Not only the material you use, but also the time it needs to be produced, the volume you have to transport, the prices, of course, and maybe also additional information like how many gasoline you may use for the transport. So all circular components already integrated and being able to make a very sharp price for that. Based on that, we within the faculty said, that's a very good approach. We have to keep this guy, and we have to make sure we use him as the most and try to push him and support him. So therefore, we developed the concept of the PD lab. It was a house designed to be built entirely CNC milled, which boosts the circularity by interchangeable, demountable components based on materials which are bio-based, and CNC milled using these technologies to increase accuracy and the detailing. Said so, we applied this to the 3TU, which is a universal research grant funded from the 3 and nowadays 4 technical universities in the Delft, in the Netherlands. And we formed a couple of partners, got a grant, 50,000, asked a couple of companies to join, and then we started this. 3TU made these constructions after we told them that we should not rely on the sharp point of the pencil of the craftsman on the building site who's able to read our drawings carefully and make the lines where to cut the boards. We would like to change this into a way that you digitally design, engineer, and also produce these parts, taking the sharp point of the pencils out of consideration. In principle, we set up a couple of goals, which are naive but challenging. In principle, we talked about zero tolerance, no screws, only bolts, because they can be replaced. No tools on the building site in order to increase or to lower failure costs. We did not do this because it's easy, but we did it because it's hard. And for us, failure is always an option. We sat together, linked a couple of graduation students to this project by bringing research and education together. Over here we have Jeroen. He's responsible for the facade. Nick thought about interconnecting these building components, and within 2 of our best graduation projects, they developed the entire house based on the concepts Peter was already developed beforehand. So in principle, it's Lego blocks which are interconnecting, easy to carry by 2 persons to the building site and assembled with a couple of tools and just a few nuts and bolts. You can see here these pre-manufactured CNC milled components fit together. Nuts are already included. Holes are on the outside, on the building site. Everything fits together like a glove. Said so, we built the first components and showed it on the building fair. Back then, in this hall, it really worked like that. The only thing you needed was a rubber hammer and a smile. And this was after the first steps, we were already able to showcase this, used as an office during the facade fair, and was also the key to attract more and more sponsors. Back then, we have already figured out how the different components come together. We have a box unit, which is a vapor open construction. We have a flex insulation, an outer layer, which is the green one, which is watertight for the time being out exposed while building it, and a facade cladding that is not only the cladding, but also the entire raincoat. What you can also see on top, the screws that hold these elements together are also the mounting holes for the facade brackets. So in principle, a very smart construction. We designed this concept on our faculty back in front of a bus station to be visible for every of our students. And that took quite a while. And nearly 1.5 years later, due to some problems getting the building permit, officially this is a rain roof on top of a bicycle stand. We were able to get support from Royo scaffolding company. They set up a scaffolding over there, and you can see on the top right, this is the weather. It poured rain as hell. And sometimes I really like wearing hard hats, especially in the hard rain. We've placed 15 tons of concrete as a counterweight because we're not able to build any foundations. That might be a warning for all of you students. Whenever you start building lightweight, bring enough concrete. At the same time, the production of these pre-boxes were already made in the company of Peter. We loaded into a truck, headed towards the building site, and actually, in this case, next in comparison to the one we've already seen before, we tried to not move too much air, so therefore these elements were smaller and be easier to handle. Put all together, and then rain struck again. Code orange, hurricane warnings, and that makes us realize that we really have problems. What we haven't foreseen in the fair was actually that the material, which was made to 0.5 millimeter tolerances, enlarged itself by 3 millimeters. And what I've talked about, no tools, we brought a backup, and at the end we also had to make a couple of modifications in order to make these elements fit together. Being there, everything went smoothly, and the hammers got a little bit bigger, and you know what they say, if you can't fix it with a hammer, use a bigger hammer. The sound on the building site was like that. 4 people in a perfectly aligned rhythm, bringing these pieces together in the condition of pouring rain. And as much as I like these dramatic skies, I would have really asked for sunny conditions. But in general, the building processes went through very quickly. We were able to maneuver these elements here in this roof by 2 persons. And at the end, even the pre-ordered silicon or rubber ceiling on the top fitted perfectly. Being always exposed to everyone out there, we had to make sure we always had the right arguments when someone asked, and also safety taken into consideration. This might be a picture I would not show to everyone because he's there without a safety harness, and the helm on his head will not help him if he falls down. But Jeroen is a brave man, and not only being able to capable of building the entire house, he also took his fingers on the facade cladding. Thanks to Alcoa, we were able to get quite a lot of these Reno-bond facade sheets. Wonderful thing about this, if you mill it, you're able to fold it like an origami structure. While this material is very common in facade constructions up then, there's always a subconstruction needed, a ceiling or something like that, and we opted for a version that can be demountable easily and also has an integral rain gutter. We defined within his graduation projects the most crucial details, and I can always say for the young students, always start at the corner. If you're able to fix the corner details, you're done. Using a morphological box, we are able to figure out the requirements we set in advance to be able to compare all the different technologies and all the details next to each other, judge them by a pointing system, being able to make sure where the weight, where your preference is. So demountability was actually higher than reusability, for instance, and therefore we are able to find the right path within this box of possibilities for this very building to design the facade. Using different router bits on the CNC mill we've already used for the wood constructions, we are able to define all the different lines. We are able to cut, trim, and also pre-mill these lines where the elements can be folded. And digitally, you can see the milled pieces from one facade panel underneath, and the paths these different router bits has to follow to make this happen. At the end, it's a nice nesting. In this case, there's still room for it, but we won't not be able to lose suction on the table because this makes problem within the milling process. With wood, you may be able to reduce the waste of this even more. What comes out is something like that. The machine mills it down to 0.5 millimeter. That's the lasting part of the aluminum cover, and then you're able to fold it. Jeroen figured out how to mount this. In this case, it was meant to be angled in a 25-degree angle and then pushed into the construction. In this case, I have to tell you, always add the scaffolding you would like to plan later also in the 3D model. then you will figure out that you don't have the room for a 25-degree angle because there's a scaffolding that creates problems. A hammer will help. Being able to be not only making it possible, but we also have to make sure it's proof against the wind. We made calculation for the lifting forces and the forces on these brackets. We tested them internally and figured out that all the problems or solutions lays in the detail. Within a huge variety of tests, we were able to figure out the right form and detail of these bracketing systems. And just to point out this detail here, which is the difference is in here and in here, tiny differences, 1600 Newton pulling forces, 900. You won't be able to take this apart. If once clicked on, it's done. You have to damage these panels. This is capable of being replaced. It's such a tiny little detail which makes such a big difference. So it's always about the details. Coming back to that, 800 was necessary, 900 was fine, so we chosen that for a system that can be removed again. And then we ask students to help us. If our system is so good, it explains itself on the building site, so we don't have to do, because all the smart technique is in the detail. So we have a bunch of newbies, in our case students. We made sure they were a hat and a safety vest, and we let them go after a short instruction. Worked quite well, till we every now and then face problems. And this is Tillman getting a little bit worried, because due to the rain, we won't be able to align all of these elements, which will later perform the mounting holes for the brackets perfectly. And if you make a 10.5 millimeter hole and you have to insert a 10 millimeter bolt, and these elements are 3 millimeter next to each other, you won't be able to pull the bolt in anymore. So therefore we had to every now and then drill a hole next to it or use another screw, thanks to Heiko Schrauben, one of our partners. We had a day off. ODS and Janssen Systems sponsored an entire steel facade, which is entirely made out on recycled steel elements, so a very circular element. I would not talk longer about this, but thank you very much also for this support. Back to the facade cladding, the parts pre-folded arrived on the site, and we are able to carry these to the building site very easily. Placed the first elements and already run into problems. And what you can see here is, for instance, that the clip that the fixturing mounts not aligned with these perfectly. Might be somewhere a glitch within this planning 3 or 5 months ago, and no one had seen it before. So we had, in this case, find some innovative solutions back then. And remember, this is the actual defense layer to keep the entire house watertight. We already noticed that in before, and also put a water barrier on top, just as a second barrier of defense. The facade on the short side is entirely out of a fabric. It's a glass fiber reinforced fabric over here, which comes in one big sheet, and it's then spanned on with these springs. We've never worked with that, and thanks to Polynet, which sponsored these systems and advised us via phone, we are able to overcome all our fears, and this actually worked quite well due to the high tolerances we are actually doing here. The entire house was only 3 millimeter longer than expected, and therefore all within the tolerances these components had to be. Talking about detail, complexity is not a problem if you're aware of this. So you have every component of this come together, the structural building components out of wood, the facade bracketing, the fabric facade, and all out worked perfectly in this case, with every now and then a little bit massaging of these corners. For the assembling right now, I would have started at the edges, because you can always make the parts in between a little bit smaller. Here, detail also, and what the key eye will see is this screw over here. Because we figured out that the popping, the clicking forces within these panels were not as we hoped due to the light unalignment of these elements. So we used a couple of bigger screws, which we make sure will also be watertight at the end to secure these elements, to prevent them from flying off after the next code orange weather warning. This is one of the last panels. As we succeed and provide over here, this will be a part where it will leak, but in this case not a problem, because the facade underneath is open and it can drop down, and Jeroen was able to place this very last piece. There's still a little bit bigger gap, but from a distance from 10 meters you can't see. This is the facade on the entire building after removing the scaffolding. On day 2 we got a phone call. Someone stole your windows. So what? Yeah, the left and right elements are open. That can't be, it's invisible glass. Thanks to Le Robel and Gladian Gas, we got these very lovely invisible glass panes. Insulation is a little bit lower, but if you're in front of it, perpendicular, they're really gone. Quite amazing. While we see some gaps, unalignments within these panels, and if you come closer, they will become bigger. We are still in a very close range of these tolerances, and we are quite happy about that. Having already a big list of things that go wrong, I count 42 right now, which means the next building of this will be 42 times better. Looking at the back of the building, it's a white beauty. And looking at the renderings we did before, you might find a glitch by a missing rooftop. Next time, I know a Velux visiting professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcel. This was a true learning experience from hard work and trial and error.
I can tell.
Yeah. So we'll call you next time. We're going to build a pavilion here.